I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creepin' and crawlin'. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussin' and fightin', and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussin' and fightin', and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Oh, and good morning to you too, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone listening on the internet, wherever or whenever you may be. My name is Joe DeMare, and you are about to listen to an incredible hour of radio called For a Green Future. And those who've been listening for a while, and believe it or not, next week will be the start of our 5th year broadcasting this show. But those of you who've been listening for a while know that once a year we do a clip show. We just go back over the last year's worth of shows and pull out some of the highlights. There's too many highlights really to fit into an hour, but we're going to be talking about some really intense things. And as happens every year, when I look back over what we did in 2023, the guests that we had, the scientists, the politicians, the activists, the everybody, I'm just floored. I mean, we really managed to get the cream of the crop here on our show. Some of the people who've agreed to be interviewed are just amazing. So for the next hour, we're going to go back over and talk about some of the bigger things that happened and some of the better guests. And, of course, the big story of 2023, the story that we've been following all year, that wound through, we mentioned in almost every episode, was just the flabbergasting way that the global temperatures have leapt off the charts, have leapt up into whole new levels of the graph. And that, as we know, because this is the one fact I've tried to infuse into this program, the whole globe is caught in a positive feedback loop. The global warming that we're creating is causing more global warming, and finally this is the year that all the scientists are in agreement that, yeah, that's what's going on. They're still afraid to talk about it, really, because the implications are so amazing, but here we are. I'm recording this on December 28th. As most of you know, we had a very gray Christmas, and it's almost 50 degrees right now. So I think there's no more question. But there's still lots of other issues to talk about, and we're going to go on to listen to our guests, some clips from our guests. And this first clip is actually coming from a guest we had way back in January 8th of 2023, a fellow named Eric Smith, and he's from the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. The reason I interviewed him is because of all the tax credits that are available now to do things like put in geothermal or put up solar panels. And that is the best emotional treatment for the kind of the depression that comes along with the realization of what's going on in terms of global warming. If you take make the sacrifice, and it's not really a sacrifice because in most places you'll actually come out ahead economically. So if you make the investment to put in solar panels or buy an electric car or put in geothermal, you will be doing your part. You will be helping to turn the corner and get us off this suicidal addiction to fossil fuels. So anyway, here is a little bit of my interview with Eric Smith. Well, hello and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share your name and title with our audience?
Well, Joe, my name is Eric Smith, and I'm actually a spokesman for the IRS.
Great. Thanks for coming on the show. I've invited you to discuss the energy conservation tax credits that take effect this year because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So, for a start, could you please explain what exactly a tax credit is and how they work?
Well, that's a very good question, Joe, and people are often confused by some of the terms that we use with taxes that Congress has developed. And probably the real confusion that you see most of all is between deductions and credits. A deduction reduces the income on which you figure the tax, whereas a credit reduces the actual tax itself. And it seems as if Congress has kind of moved more in the direction in recent years of using tax credits as a way of delivering tax benefits to folks rather than deductions. And certainly when it comes to the energy area, that is very definitely the case.
Okay, great. So now the specific tax credits we're talking about today are designed to encourage people to move towards cleaner energy. And I know that there's credits starting this year for things like solar panels on your house or installing geothermal heating. But what other sorts of environmentally friendly things are eligible for the new credits?
Well, let's actually talk about that a little bit because that's actually to some extent the credit for alternative energy investments, such as you mentioned, solar, geothermal, and wind, and so forth. In one form or another, that's actually been around for quite a while now. The way that the credit is figured has varied, and that's where the new law did make some changes. Now, a lot of that, I'd say the bulk of that is actually in effect right now. In other words, if you put solar panels on your home or installed a geothermal system or something along those lines in 2022, you can actually claim that credit now when you file your 2022 return. And we have actually, for years, the form that you use to claim the home energy credits is Form 5695. That's an attachment to your tax return, one of the supplemental schedules that you use. The credit that's available for most of the alternative energy areas is 30% of the amount you spend. And it's there is not now. At times there's been dollar limits on that, but the way the law is now in 2022 and in the next number of years, there is not a dollar limit.
Okay, so as you heard, no dollar limit to the amount of tax credit that you can get for putting solar panels on your roof or putting in geothermal or doing things of that nature. And so make this the year, make 2024 the year that you finally put those solar panels up. So now, our next guest, this show first aired on January 29th, is Stephany Seay. And Stephany Seay is a longtime contributor to this show because she keeps track of the Yellowstone bison. Yellowstone bison being the last wild herd, genetically pure wild herd in the United States of bison. And this year, sadly, we'd been following her for 4 years, way back when she was working with the Buffalo Field campaign. But the Buffalo Field campaign decided they should open the bison up to hunting by native hunters. And what happened was just unregulated mass slaughter. We lost over a third of the herd in 2023. So here's Stephany Seay talking about it.
Since then, we've had some significant weather events that have driven buffalo down to lower elevation habitat because that's what they do. That's what they have to do to survive. But there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of buffalo within the Gardner Basin, hundreds of them outside of the park boundaries. And it's not that they're totally safe in the park because, of course, the Park Service has started capturing for slaughter and domestication, i.e. quarantine. But the hunt is out of control. The hunt, it's a frenzy out there. There's been at least over 500 buffalo killed so far, and it's not even February yet.
Wow. Yeah, that's terrible.
It is.
Yeah, it's funny that you use that word frenzy because I've read historical accounts of when people were hunting the bison in large numbers, and when they had, like, for example, the trains that were sole purpose was to go out on the plains and shoot buffalo. And
right.
It seems like there can be kind of almost sort of a madness of when people start killing these magnificent animals.
Definitely. I mean, it's kind of like that term buck fever. What's going on now is like buffalo fever, and it's nuts, man. I mean, people are just shooting into, they don't even care who they're shooting. And a friend of mine described it really well. And actually I stayed with her, and she has a house right across Old Yellowstone Trail from Beatty Gulch. Okay. So she lives literally on the front lines every day, hearing all these hundreds and hundreds of gunshots, seeing buffalo coming out of the park, seeing them get gunned down, people around the neighborhood being afraid to go out of their house. And, like, because the bullets are just flying. And she described it as a shooting gallery, like an arcade shooting gallery. Like they're not thinking about who they're even killing. They're just shooting at any buffalo they can get, and it's like a lot of them are the matriarchs, the mothers that are pregnant, and they have all this wisdom. They're the ones that teach the buffalo, how the best time to migrate to which location, the best place to find food during what season. They're the ones that teach all the youth how to be a buffalo, a wild buffalo, and they're getting gunned down like crazy. I walked when it was quiet. There was a lull in the hunting, and so I took the opportunity to take my camera and walk Beatty Gulch just to document all the gut piles. And there were so many calves in all those gut piles, and
unborn calves. Yeah, that were still.
And it's like these hunters, it doesn't make any sense. It's just doesn't make any sense because so many of them and people who represent them are, we want more buffalo on a larger landscape. We need more habitat. It's like, yeah, but you guys are the ones just being that wall of bullets that aren't allowing them to get anywhere. I mean, you're part of the problem big time. And we can put all the blame on Yellowstone and their trap. We can put all the blame on Montana and their intolerance, but it is an individual's responsibility, an individual's choice. No one's being forced, as they like to say. No one's holding a gun to your head and say, go kill these buffalo like this, right? This is a choice. And it is a huge part of the problem. And there is never going to be wild buffalo restoration or expansion of them on the landscape so long as this kind of thing is taking place.
And that was Stephany Seay, and we should have her on the show very soon to see how things are going this year. Last year, it was just incredible how much of the herd got wiped out. So let's hope that we do get closer to the goal of having wild bison on the landscape again. We got plenty of bison in pens. We got plenty of bison inside fences that are being raised like cows. But what we really need are roaming herds. They can bring the prairie back. And so we'll talk to Stephany soon. All right. Next story. This is kind of unusual because usually I am interviewing people or talking about reports other people have done. But in 2023, we had the East Palestine train derailment, probably the biggest environmental story in Ohio that year. And hopped in the car, and I went down there to see firsthand what was going on. And so here is a portion of my report from that terrible disaster that happened down there in East Palestine, which, like all toxic spills, is still going on. The people of East Palestine are reporting more and more health effects from all those toxic chemicals they were exposed to. But here's my report from the disaster as it was still fresh. See about 15 of the crashed cars where I am right now. We definitely smelled a pretty strong odor as we were driving up here. So it's kind of hard to describe. It's sort of a sweet odor. Right now the wind is blowing towards the car, so we're not smelling anything at the moment. But yeah, a lot of people, a lot of work, a lot of activity. But we'll see if we can manage to talk to somebody soon. Ready?
Yep.
All right. So just tell us your name.
I'm Steve Weaver.
Steve Weaver. And you weren't here when the actual derailment happened?
No.
No. But your wife was?
Yes.
What did she say about it?
She just thought something blew up at the company down below us. I was at work, so I told her I was on my way home anyhow. So by the time I got here, I could be a block and a half from here. So
oh, they blocked.
yeah,
They
they
kept
had
you.
everything blocked off. So.
And how did they get her out of it, or?
Actually, I parked the car in the middle of the road and walked down.
Uh,
So I did come down to get her and that. So
and I hear dogs.
yeah.
Did your dogs have to stay, or did you get them?
They stayed the night, and the next day we came and got them back and took them down to her father's. So.
Right. So the fire was burning for quite a few days.
Yes.
Yeah. And did you guys stay away the whole time?
Yeah, we came back on this past Friday, the Friday before, so 2 days after they said we were allowed to come back.
And did you notice like a strong odor?
Nothing super strong.
So, do you feel reassured by what they're telling you?
No.
No.
Not at all. It's one of those things, you got to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Do you feel like you want more information? Or?
No, definitely. We haven't been told nothing from the start, really. I mean, the only thing that they tell you is that the air quality is good, the water's good. But they ain't proven anything. I mean,
Right.
There's really nothing out there.
Not giving you any numbers.
And they don't know about the water. They don't know enough.
They wouldn't tell you what was in.
Yeah, they wouldn't tell you what was on the train.
So you had to clear out before they did the controlled explosion.
Yes. Within an hour, they had us evacuated down here.
Did you see the huge cloud that there's so many pictures of?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, does this make you think you might want to move or anything like that?
It's always questionable. What's going to happen later on down the road? What's already happening now?
Right. Thanks very much. Have a good one. Okay, so here's where I have to report that while we were driving around in this area, I noticed both times I got out to interview people near the tracks, when I got back in the van, even though I hadn't smelled anything, I definitely had a little bit of nausea. I definitely felt a little sick to my stomach, and it was more severe when I was closer to where they were working on the wreck, and it was less severe when we were a few blocks away. So then we kept driving around. Here we are next to Leslie Run here in East Palestine, and as you can see, a lot of activity. They're pulling water out of this creek and sending it through these hoses over to this tanker truck there. So even though even though we are upstream from the actual derailment, apparently there's contamination all the way up this way too. But widespread contamination here, and definitely a taste in the air. Definitely something that's, you can sort of feel it in your mouth as you're breathing. So here we see them spraying water from the creek back up onto the land. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. So here we are, this is Sulphur Run, and as you can see, they're trying to completely block this water from getting further downstream, and they're pumping it out into this tanker truck. So here, some of the water they've pumped out of the creek, they're spraying it right back in. Apparently the idea is just aerating it and getting the volatile chemicals out into the air instead of into the water. So this might be a good point to note that none of the workers we saw, well, with the exception of one guy, had breathing protection. All right, so could you tell me your name?
Jensen Seabrook.
Okay, we're working here at the original Roadhouse 2. So, what are people saying when they come in? Are people worried about the whole situation?
I mean, some people just don't want like the fountain drinks, like the water. Like,
So they're avoiding the water.
Yeah.
Are people complaining about?
Not necessarily here. Nobody really complains. As long as we're open, that's all they care, really.
So do you live here in town? Or?
Yeah, I live on Carbon Hill.
Carbon Hill. So you were outside the evacuation zone?
Yeah, for the most part. They made me leave when they decompressed when they blew it up.
Oh, right. So did you see the cloud and everything?
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, what was that like?
It was big. I don't know. It's crazy.
Big, crazy. So, are you worried going forward about like contamination or long-term stuff?
I mean, as of now, I'm not. I mean, it's whatever. Life is life. It's gonna happen. So I mean,
Right. And you didn't notice anything?
I don't notice
personally
anything
about,
happening to me, but I heard people say something about like getting sick and stuff, like, and they're blaming it all on that.
So here we see one of the many air sampling devices that are scattered all over the neighborhood. Now, there was no indication on these air monitors who they were being monitored for. It didn't say anything about Department of Health. And in fact, we did run into a fellow, one of the yellow vest fellas who was taking air samples, and he told us he was with a private corporation, but he didn't tell us who he worked for. And he, of course, couldn't tell us what he found. So then we drove around to the other side of the tracks, and we took a look at what was going on there. We pretty much ran the length of where the derailed cars were off the tracks. And then we went over, we found a parking lot where we could get a picture of what was going on. And I'm just going to let the sounds, the ambient sounds, go for a minute here. So what you were hearing there were these huge grapplers, kind of like cranes, but at the end they had the big grabbers. They were lifting up these chunks of metal, and putting them in dump trucks. We are on the other side of the tracks. All this mud on the road is probably carrying contamination in it. Definitely got a strong taste in my mouth. This is obviously going to be a very long cleanup. A lot of contamination. So that was our live report from East Palestine. Bit of an adventure. Wasn't too keen on hanging around there very long because we were not feeling good. My Joey, who later on served as co-host for the show, he reported headaches. So I felt nausea. He felt headaches. But neither one of us felt that was a healthy place to stick around. Okay, now another story that we always follow with here on For a Green Future is the infamous House Bill 6. And there was huge developments in the House Bill 6 stories this year, uh, mainly Larry Householder's conviction. And we interviewed Jake Zuckerman with Cleveland.com to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, the big picture here is that Larry Householder, who is then the Speaker of the House, and his people generally, started this nonprofit called Generation Now, and it's known as a 501c4 under the tax code, and these kinds of entities can lawfully accept unlimited sums of money from corporate donors or from individuals, and it can spend them in certain but not unlimited ways on politics. But the draw of the use of these things is that they never have to disclose their donors. And a householder is accused of secretly controlling this nonprofit, which he's not allowed to do. And according to the prosecutors, that $60 million, a lot of to run a PR campaign to support this bailout bill that the householder championed. But in reality, the money functioned as a bribe. It gave householder this immense political benefit of getting his people into office who would name him into the House Speaker's role. And there were also personal payments. Some of the money wound up paying down his credit card bills, paying off some legal debt, paying for some home repairs to a Florida house. He was accused, along with his political strategist who oversaw the nonprofit and the races that they were following, the allied candidate races. They charged a couple of lobbyists, some of whom pleaded guilty and went on to testify against Larry Householder. And they charged a lobbyist named Matt Borges, and he's accused of paying a $15,000 bribe to someone who was organizing the campaign to try to get enough signatures to repeal House Bill 6, to get rid of this bailout that Householder championed.
Right, that would be Tyler Fairman.
Yes, he was out. That's correct.
Yeah, and the plot was supposedly hatched over a steak dinner.
Yeah, so according to the prosecution, this plan came to be in about January 2017, and Larry Householder had just won his re-election bid in 2016, so just as a lowly member in the Ohio House. But he got on board First Energy's corporate jet as it flew from Akron to Washington, D.C., where they were going to President Trump's inauguration. If you remember, it was, it's always a big gala, black tie sort of weekend in D.C., and it had that extra Donald Trump flavor going on there, and the Householder was going to a number of events, but according to the prosecutors, he and executives at First Energy had this series of steak dinners at nice restaurants, fancy DC restaurants, where they're accused of coming up with this plan where First Energy would fund householders effectively as a campaign. It's a campaign within a campaign to become the Speaker of the House. And they would fund that effort, and in exchange, Householder would pass this legislative bailout that First Energy had been fighting for years, because these nuclear plants they owned just weren't making money. Any way you cut it, they were hemorrhaging money. They were technically owned by a subsidiary of First Energy, but that subsidiary was way underwater. It was having an effect on First Energy's books. These were losers, and their only solution was to get a state subsidy to prop them up.
All right. So the big news, of course, was that Larry Householder was found guilty, as was one of his henchmen, Matt Borges. And later on in the year, Larry Householder was sentenced to the maximum penalty, 20 years in federal prison. And Matt Borges, who was mentioned by Jake Zuckerman there, also he got 5 years. So the wheels of justice turned kind of slowly. This all happened back in 2019, but in 2023, Matt Borges and Larry Householder were finally held accountable for breaking the law. Now, someone else has been arrested, the former head of PUCO, Sam Randazzo, who maintains his innocence, but everybody around him seems to be have been found guilty. So we'll see. House Bill 6 may yet give us more stories to report on in 2024. So next, on to a happy event. We had been following the creation of a movie called Radioactive, The Women of 3 Mile Island. And that was created by a woman named Heidi Huttner. And we sort of stuck with her through the whole process of the filming and the editing and so forth. And the movie finally came out back in March. And so we interviewed one of the people featured in that movie, Joan Doroshow. And so let's hear from
Sure.
Joan.
My name is Joanne Doroshow. I am featured in this documentary because when I was a very young lawyer, 40 some years ago, I intervened on behalf of the local community group to try to stop the restart of 3 Mile Island. This was the undamaged sister reactor to the facility that had the meltdown in 1979. So I'm in the film, but I also helped as an associate producer of the documentary.
Right, and quite the documentary it is. You folks, last night got another standing ovation. Well deserved. And the website is.
I think radioactivethefilm.com. Actually, I don't have it top of my. If people just search for the film Radioactive, The Women of 3 Mile Island, all of that information will come up.
Right. Well, you are correct. It's radioactivethefilm.com. So, okay. So Heidi talked a little bit, and you guys talked a little bit in the Q&A after the movie, which was also great. And I want to acknowledge the New Republic magazine that co-sponsored the showing today. I was very happy to see a big media outlet like that taking notice. But I kind of got the impression that she was sort of surprised. The whole sort of falling into making this movie, it wasn't something she sort of planned and went after. It was sort of something that just kind of appeared in her life. And I was wondering, what about the movie surprised you? And I also have to say that, I was in the audience last night and I heard other people talking, some people who've been anti-nuclear activists for years, and almost everyone learned something they didn't know about the disaster from this movie. What surprised you the most as the movie was being created?
Well, of course, as the lawyer who was very involved in this, the post-accident period, I knew far more, I felt, than the public really understood about the accident. The nuclear industry grabbed hold of the narrative about it, and their narrative was this accident was no big deal, nobody died, let's move on. But those of us very involved at the time knew that this was an extraordinarily serious accident that was a near catastrophe, and there was a lot of radiation that got out of that plant, and that now, years later, because cancers tend to take many years to manifest, you're seeing really an extraordinary numbers of illnesses and seemingly sicknesses related to that accident. And that, I think, is surprising. Maybe not surprising, but it is a revealing situation that sadly is anecdotal at this point, because health studies were never properly begun at the start of this accident. That's because the nuclear industry insisted that, very little radiation got out. People, though, at the time saw the effects of it right away, and it was extremely frustrating for the community to not have their concerns taken seriously and the health studies as a result were never properly done. What's shown in the film is that now there are some new attempts to take a look at chromosomal damage within the bodies of people that were close to the accident, the plant at the time. And maybe there'll be some confirmation that their health was affected by this accident. But it's a real tragedy that their concerns were ignored initially, and that as a result, we're never really going to know for sure what the full health impact was of that community.
So hopefully you will get a chance to watch that movie, Radioactive, The Women of 3 Mile Island. It should be coming to streaming services and maybe even have a nationwide theatrical release perhaps this year, 2024, coming year. All right, now it's time to hear from our patrons and sponsors. For Green Futures brought to you by our patrons. These are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. And there they chose a monthly membership level from our many possible membership levels, one that fit their budget. And every month, a little bit of money comes out of their account, and they get to choose the amount. So it's an amount that doesn't hurt. And then it comes over to our account. And that's how we could keep this show on the air. We're very, very grateful to our patrons who have stuck with us for years now. And we just want to thank everyone who's got the understanding that in order to keep shows like this on the air, people have to step forward and help. So thanks again for our patrons.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
And then now we're going to hear from one of our most frequent and favorite interviewees, Diane DeRigo of NEARS. And way back in May, she was talking to us about a plan to do interim waste storage at sites in Texas and New Mexico. So let's hear a little bit about that.
Sure. It was actually May 9th. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission gave a license to Holtec, a company that also is decommissioning nuclear power reactors around the country, to bring nuclear waste for supposedly temporary storage in a community in New Mexico, in generally the southern part of New Mexico, and it would potentially take 173,000 metric tons of nuclear waste, and that's a lot. That is more than is even. Well, right now in the country, we've got about 90,000 metric tons. This is what's created at nuclear power reactors. If you have nuclear power, you always have nuclear waste. You have so-called low-level and you have high-level radioactive waste. And the high-level or irradiated fuel, they sometimes call it spent fuel, it is millions of times more radioactive than the fresh uranium fuel when it goes in. And it stays dangerous literally into the millions of years. And it's now stored at 80 or 90 sites around the country where we have nuclear power plants, and the communities there want to get rid of it. So what Holtec is offering is to bring it all there. The problem is bringing it there will involve transporting it for at least 40 or 50 years to get it all there, and it would move on our roads and our rails and walkways, mostly on rail, and it would for at least 40 years to get there, since it's supposed to be a temporary site, moving again away, so that would take another 40 or 50 years. So what we're talking about, if this facility were to start up, is extremely dangerous, and it would put the entire country, all the people along railroad tracks and roads and waterways that this stuff would travel, it would put all of us at risk on a regular basis for decades.
So now let us talk about the problems with this idea. Could you talk about gamma radiation? What is it, and why should our listeners be concerned about it?
Materials are radioactive because they're unstable, and in order to try to become stable, they give off energy in the form of alpha or beta particles, which are stopped by shielding. But gamma rays, the energy waves, they're like X-rays, are given off from the radioactive elements, and they can penetrate the shielding on the casks. Some of them could go pretty far. So even if there's no accident, the radioactivity from this irradiated fuel from nuclear power could be detected as far as a half a mile from the containers as they're moving on the roads and rails and waterways. So gamma rays, they're very penetrating. They can zap right through our bodies and maybe not do damage, but they could also do damage along the path that the gamma rays travel. And they're very powerful. They can disrupt the cellular operations that are going on in the body. They ionize, change the positive to negative charges so that the normal things that happen for us to live and survive are disrupted. It could be a small damage that corrects itself, or it could be a very serious damage that causes cancer, reduces immunity, causes birth defects. So there's all kinds of potential dangers, and the best thing to do is to avoid exposure. So to routinely expose the public to this material for 40 years as it's moving on roads and rails to a supposedly interim site is putting us at unnecessary risk. So what the gamma rays are coming from radioactive elements in the waste. The waste is in the form of rods that have a cladding on them, and inside the cladding are uranium, cesium, strontium, iodine, plutonium, a whole battery of radioactive elements that give off gamma. They could be emitted from those radioactive elements routinely, but if there were an accident like happened in Palestine and the canister was breached and the radioactive air and travel and exposed people not just at the site but downwind.
All right, so just a quick update on that story. Even though the NRC granted the license for the interim storage, the location in Texas was overturned by Texas State Court, so that interim waste site is out. There is an appeal, there's a court case going right on now that's challenging the New Mexico interim waste site, and let's hope it succeeds, because otherwise all of us are going to get irradiated with gamma radiation, which, contrary to some fictional stories, does not grant super strength or anything like that. Okay, on to our next story. We are going to talk with Molly Wickham, who is also called Slado, and she is a Native American up in, quote, British Columbia, unquote, Canada, who has been fighting the Coastal Link pipeline for a number of years, and she gave us an update.
My name is Slido. It's a wing chief name in Cassia House, and I'm the spokesperson for the Get 'em Done Checkpoint reoccupation village site.
Right. So the Coastal GasLink pipeline is a huge story with many different layers and aspects. We're not going to be able to cover it all in 15 minutes, but could you please start with a brief explanation of what the pipeline is and what it's supposed to do?
Sure. So the Coastal GasLink pipeline is a 670-kilometer pipeline that is proposed to bring fracked gas from northeastern so-called British Columbia to the coast, to be shipped over to overseas markets, mostly Asian markets.
So we first interviewed you on this story back in 2020. At that time, you and others were living in your unceded territory in what is called British Columbia. What did the Canadian government do to those of you who were trying to stop this pipeline?
Well, in 2020, there was a large-scale militarized raid to the territory, with multiple arrests of many different campsites, many different support sites for, allegedly blocking or stopping the stopping the construction of the CGL pipeline. At that point, there was the eviction from the hereditary chiefs. And then again in 2021, there was another large-scale raid on the territory with multiple arrests. And right now we're still seeing the fallout of that in terms of court cases and trials coming up for a lot of our people that have been criminalized from this process on our territory for upholding our laws, which are in contrast to the colonial laws in so-called Canada.
Something that also happened at that time were protests in sympathy with your struggle that practically paralyzed the entire nation of Canada. Can you review a little bit of what happened then? And are those protest efforts ongoing?
So what happened in 2020 in response to the militarized raid on Wet'suwet'en territory and the police presence, the continued police presence on our territory, was what we called Shut Down Canada. And a lot of allies, a lot of supporters, a lot of people that were following along with the what was happening in our territory shut down major infrastructure all across so-called Canada, airports, railways, major government buildings and different government offices. And that really crippled the whole Canadian economy in a way that was interesting to see how fragile everything was and how easily disrupted that it was. And so the government came to the table with the Wet'suwet'en, the provincial and the federal government, to sign an MOU that saying that they would recognize our title to our territories. We've never ceded, surrendered, or lost in war any of our 22,000 square kilometers. And so what we realized since then is that that was actually just smoke and mirrors to stop the support blockades and to stop the support and show Canada that they resolved the issue and that everything was fine. We know that that's not the case. And then COVID happened. So a lot of things got disrupted and stopped because of the pandemic.
Right. Over the course of this project, it sounds like the government of Canada has brutally violated your rights and pushed the pipeline through much of your territory. On its website, TMC claims the pipeline is 91% complete. What kind of repercussions have there been for those of you carrying on the fight to this day? Are there still legal charges pending?
There are trials that are coming up this fall where myself, other Indigenous land defenders, and chiefs from our nation are facing jail time because of the resistance, because of us holding up our laws. and protecting our territories. We still are experiencing severe police repression from all of the efforts that we've seen for uphold, and I think it's really important that people understand that we are not, we're being criminalized in the media, we're being criminalized by the state, but what we're doing is upholding what's in law, and that's all that we're doing, is protecting our territories. We have every right to do that. Our laws say that we have a responsibility to do that. We continue to have police surveilling and harassing and intimidating our people on a daily basis. Our territories are still crawling with police and private security everywhere, filming our every move, following us to and from our homes. And so the repression that we're seeing is really scary in, a so-called democratic country where it's not supposed to be a police state. And they're actually being, the KERG, which is the special unit of police that have been hired to do the tactics or carry out the tactics of repression for the state, is actually being under review by the Canadian Review Complaints Commission. So there's an investigation into what's happening. Is being watched by international bodies in the UN. And yeah, it's an ongoing state of repression in our communities. And it's also an ongoing slippery slope of what can happen and what's going to happen to other Indigenous people and other movements to protect the land, and I think that regular Canadians or people that feel like they live in a democratic country are their eyes are being opened to the fact that, industry and money is going to be made by industry and the state at any cost to human rights, to Indigenous rights. And we're seeing clear examples of that happen.
Yes, unfortunately, all over the world. And you may have noticed that interview was actually being done by Joseph D. DeMare, my son. I had to stop doing the co-hosting. I had to give up the mic because I ran for mayor of Bowling Green, Ohio, as a Green Party person, and I'm proud to say I got 26% of the vote. I'm sad I didn't win, but it was a pretty good showing for third party. And so I had to find substitute people to take over the mic, and Shabazz Khan also did the show for a number of months. So thanks so much to Joseph D. DeMare and Shabazz Khan for their really good co-hosting. All right, so now we got time for one more, and I think we're going to talk with Emma Wilson, who's with the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, about deep ocean mining.
The deep ocean might be far away, but it provides vital services for us on land. For example, it plays a key role in the very air that we breathe. It's commonly said that 3 out of every 4 breaths of oxygen that we take come straight from the ocean.
Wow.
So we're tied to this place, and we might not see it. It's an area of the world that most of us will never get a chance to go to in our lifetimes, but it's with us and it's in us, and we need to protect it for our own well-being as well.
With global warming, we've talked about that a little already. We're seeing the scientists' worst case projections being played out, becoming true very quickly. What's the worst case scenario with deep sea mining? What do scientists say could happen?
So I'll start with what we do know about what the impacts of deep sea mining would be. First of all, if this activity were to proceed on the scale currently planned, it would be the largest mining operation in the history of humankind. Precisely at a time when we know that we need to be moving away from these extractive models because they're not sustainable and they're highly damaging. And so in the context of this really large mining operation, obviously the impacts are not going to be confined to the mining site alone, right? The ocean is a moving, fluid place. The effects will go way beyond the areas that are being mined. So what are we talking about here in terms of actual impacts? Well, the first thing is that there will be species extinctions and therefore significant biodiversity loss. There will also be toxic waste generated by this activity. There are big concerns around the sediment plumes that would be coming up from the collector vehicle on the floor and also being spewed out from the collector ships sitting on the top of the ocean, right? So we've got this kind of dual dust storm, underwater dust storm that's being generated, but would have massive impacts on the entire water column, right? Like full ecosystems coming right up from the bottom up to the top. Of course, there are potential impacts as well on the climate regulatory functions of the deep sea. I mentioned earlier that the deep sea plays a really important role in locking away carbon. So there are big concerns about the impacts that this activity would have on those systems. There's a serious risk that those systems might very well be disturbed and not be operating as they should be. But I think something really important to think about in this context of deep sea mining is that I just talked about what we do know, but there's so much that we don't know as well about the impacts of this activity. And to a great extent, we're kind of going in blind here. There's a massive amount of uncertainty. And one example that I think demonstrates that really well is that here we are on the brink of saying, yes, okay, let's let deep sea mining go ahead. And yet 2 months ago, there was a study by a German research institute that found that some of the metal deposits that they're planning to mine are actually radioactive.
So that was it. Interesting how the deep sea mining ties back in with the radiation, and all these things are tied together. All these environmental impact things that we report on, they all are connected because, like it or not, as we say at the start of every show, we are all connected. We're all tied up together on this wonderful, wonderful planet called Earth. So, as I also said, that was just a fraction of the incredible shows we had all through 2023. It takes more than an hour just to go back over them like this. But I want to thank you all for listening, for supporting us, for paying attention and caring about the environment this year, 2023, and going forward. It's going to be a very challenging time. We don't know what's going to happen in 2024, but we know there will be lots of important environmental stories to tell you, and we're going to be here to tell them to you. If you want to look at a complete picture of what we did last year, or all our shows are available on both YouTube and as a podcast on Podomatic. We are going to be going forward, so if you have any suggestions or comments, you can email them to joe@joedemare for greenfuture.org, or you can send a text or call 419-973-5841. Once again, we're very grateful we got through 2023 despite the challenges, and we're determined to get through 2024 with your help. This is Joe DeMare signing off. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.